Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Bitsight webinar, the F Word Part 2, AI and Framework Compliance Deployed with Confidence. We are really glad you could all join us today. Over the next hour, we'll deep dive into how organizations can securely and confidently deploy AI within a framework-driven approach. You'll hear from our experts as they share their best practices, real-world experiences, and practical takeaways. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. You'll find helpful documents and resources in the docs section. Feel free to download them anytime. We will be launching live polls during the session so you can share your perspective and see how your responses compare to your peers. You can also use the chat feature to connect with each other throughout the webinar. And if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A tab as they come to your mind. We'll track them as we go and leave time toward the end to answer them live. Anything we don't get to, we'll follow up over email. And don't worry if you miss anything, everyone registered will receive the recording in the next couple of days. So here's what to expect in the session. We'll break the discussion into 3 key sections in an interactive Q&A style format, and then reserve about 15 minutes at the end for your questions. So make sure to make the most out of it. Now let me introduce our speakers. In today's session, I'm excited to introduce 2 key leaders from Bitsight, Amanda Ravanesi and Chris Campbell. Amanda is the Director of Product Management for third-party risk management solutions. She has spent her career at the intersection of technology, security, and risk with Bitsight, ThreatStack, and General Electric. Amanda has seen firsthand how the TPRM market has evolved over the years, and she has been instrumental in shaping solutions that now integrate AI to deliver a unified approach for risk leaders. She will be moderating today's discussion. And joining her as our featured guest is Chris Campbell, a seasoned cybersecurity leader with over 2 decades of experience in information security, risk management, and technology leadership. Chris is a Senior Vice President, Chief Information Security Officer, and Head of Technology at Bitsight. His previous roles include significant leadership positions at Future Standard, KeyBank, and Protiviti. He's actively involved in the cybersecurity thought leaders community through his role at Team 8, helping shape industry perspectives at the highest levels. Chris not only ensures Bitsight manages its own cybersecurity risk, but he also drives the technology vision that supports security initiatives for customers worldwide. Along the way, he has earned designations like CISSP, CISM, and PCIP, underscoring his deep expertise in this space. Outside of his professional achievements, Chris is passionate about mentoring upcoming cybersecurity professionals and advocating for stronger security practices across industries. We are very fortunate to have him here to share his perspective on how AI and framework compliance can be deployed with confidence. Please join me in welcoming both the speakers. And with that, I will request Amanda now to get the session started.
So, thank you so much for the introduction. We're excited to get started here. I'm going to run through our agenda for the topics we're going to discuss. We're going to have a nice Q&A session with Chris, really unpack some of the challenges around adopting AI. And specifically, if you look through how we want to navigate across the discussion, we'll start by setting a foundation, talking about how to get started, getting started with governance and frameworks within your organization, then talking about operating with a growing mindset. How do we advance collaboration across the business to make sure we're doing everything for AI most effectively as we can? And then lastly, really the end goal, harnessing the power of the data to make the most informed decisions, whether it's bringing new technologies into the business or looking at how we can drive product innovation with the data across AI workflows as well. So before we jump into today's session, I also wanted just to take a quick recap and step back to this is a part 2 webinar. Previously, we had the chance to meet with customers and present the framework intelligence to our customers, as well as talk about building a framework as the universal language across your collaborators within your own business and with your vendors. And during that time, we also wanted to kind of pulse the teams around how are you feeling when it comes to AI and using AI in your business and your day-to-day. So we did ask our audience here, where do you currently stand when it comes to using AI in your security work? And I would say we have kind of two winners that came. A lot of people are still very cautious about that. And then some folks are still experimenting. And so as we pivot into today's discussion, we recognize from the last opportunity we had to meet on this topic that there are still a lot of challenges and open questions about adopting this new technology. And that's really the impetus of this discussion here that we're going to have with Chris. We want to help our customers kind of navigate these challenges, speak from firsthand experience about how we're adopting this, what we're looking at here at Bitsight. But a lot of you might still have those pressing questions of, who should guard the AI adoption within my organization? How does legal play a role? What model and technology should I even start with? And how can we really use AI to help us and not just experiment or look for the new exciting objects? And so I think that there are a lot of open questions still in the space. There's still a new area to tread here, and that's where the discussion with Chris, we think will be really informative for you all from a customer perspective on giving you an inside view as to how we at Bitsight are approaching these challenges, these problems, and really finding opportunity to innovate with AI technologies, all while being safe and smart about how we approach the problem. So let's shift into our first topic of discussion, all around governance, frameworks, and getting started. We'll kick off this session here with a live poll for you in the audience to give us some direct feedback around this space and how you're feeling about it. So we'll start first with the poll, give you about 30 seconds or so to give us an insight in where you are in your journey, and then we'll kick off into our view. All right, we just close the poll. And so as we get started, again, we want to start taking a look at our first topic around getting started and see where you are at your journey. And seems like a lot of folks are still in the beginning stages, right, of just getting started or piloting the AI use across their businesses. Chris, as we transition into the discussion here, where would you say that you feel Bitsight is in this journey?
Yeah, it was interesting to see how the poll numbers were coming in. I think as you look at it, I mean, you can't choose two, but I think we're kind of in that phase where we're moving out of piloting, certain things for AI, and we're actually starting to scale some of the things, both internally across our business units, but then also I think, customers of ours see it within our product as well. So we're kind of in between. I would still say, if I had to guess, I would say then piloting, but I think we're starting to make that curve as we adopt, greater governance and greater technologies.
And I think that's interesting to see that a lot of folks are kind of right where our first topic is getting started and piloting and then starting to slowly move into that scale. And so when we think about setting ourselves up for success, how would you advise or look at what are the necessary steps to put those appropriate guardrails or systems in place to be successful in these types of adoptions? Like, where do we see Bitsight doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, and it's not necessarily the perfect answer, but I think it's what worked for Bitsight. I think, similar to how teams, in cybersecurity mindset, they track CVEs, they track 0 days. AI feels very similar. You see a lot of innovation, almost every day you see M&A and you see emerging risks, and it's something new every day. And guardrails are absolutely needed. I mean, it's kind of foundational to what you'll have to do to be able to adopt it in a meaningful way. They don't necessarily slow adoption, I think, but they allow teams to innovate safely. And I think that's the biggest thing. If you don't establish acceptable use policies, set boundaries, what's in scope, what's out of scope or off limits, you're going to have issues. And I think, when you add technical controls on top of that around access management, data classification, and monitoring to prevent shadow IT, that's where you'll see some wins. And there's great frameworks with regards to the NIST AI RMF, ISO 42001. But I think the big piece of that is you want governance to feel like an extension, not kind of like a reinvention of your technical control set. And I think one of the big things is you want to ensure that your time is spent on new patterns and new use cases. And when you have a use case that you move through the door, or you understand clearly what the risks are, you're not focusing on that over and over again. I think guardrails enable that freedom, but they're also what allows your business to experiment without crossing both regulatory, in some cases, or ethical boundaries.
Makes sense. And so when you look at this risk and this new technology, you're talking about implementing these guardrails, but where at the end of the day do you find that this AI risk ultimately sits?
Yeah, I think, kind of flashing back to this, I think it's not a singular team's responsibility. I think unless you're in an organization that has kind of an AI group or an AI team, for most organizations, that means it's distributed. But it still has to be owned given its importance to the organization. I also think it's similar to, when organizations get asked, where should the CISO report? Does he or she report into a chief risk officer or a CFO or a CTO? It all depends. And I think that's the same with AI, that based on what your company is looking to do with AI, based on your approach and based on your risk tolerance as well, it's going to differ. But foundationally, I think the way I can look at it is, the CISO and the security teams, they should own the technical safeguards, and the risk monitoring of AI. When you look at legal and compliance, they play a role around regulatory alignment and contracts. And then business and, I guess, data leaders, they own the ethical use and accountability for the outcomes. And the CISO can coordinate that, but AI risk ultimately lands with the business as a whole. And I think that has to be communicated, that has to be understood, because it is an enterprise risk, not just an IT or a security risk.
I think that's uniquely challenging as well when we talk about AI specifically, because a lot of AI technology is focused on innovation. And with innovation comes the ability for teams to feel empowered to experiment, to innovate, to try new technologies and things. But we know that is juxtaposition to wanting to govern and secure that. Where do you see the tolerance for experimenting, knowing that all of the AI technologies we bring in are usually bleeding edge? They're new, they're trying something different, they're moving fast. How do you balance that? And where do you find that tolerance lands for us?
Yeah, I spent 20 years in financial services before joining Bitsight, highly regulated, much different. Obviously, Bitsight, thankfully, we're grounded in the fact that we're a cybersecurity company, but we're a late stage startup. And I think that those two cultures are drastically different. But again, it's ingrained in what we do, so it's certainly beneficial. I think when you look at those highly regulated industries like finance and healthcare, there's a low risk tolerance and there's tighter guardrails. I think when you look at less regulated sectors, it's higher tolerance, but you still need those boundaries. And it's about where we saw the first poll kick off. It's about starting with controlled pilots and making sure that you have those guardrails in place, small use cases, and monitoring for risk. You don't want to go out and solve the biggest problem out of the gate. And I think this is the approach we took at Bitsight, with a few caveats. We understood the roadmap for every one of our vendors that we already have relationships with and how they're using AI. We understood where we needed to build out capabilities, and where AI could help us. And then where we needed to go buy a point solution. You talked about, following the shiny spoon. There's absolutely times that we're going to say, we're not going to build this. Somebody's doing it better, and we can fit this in right away. And we solve those problems with those tools. But lastly, we also want those moonshot type ideas, and I think those are instrumental to your program. It sounds really strange to say as a CISO, but the crazier the better. And not to say that we'll implement it, but what we want with our AI strategy as a company is we want to foster a safe environment to allow these types of discussions to occur. Because if you don't foster that environment, they're going to happen behind closed doors, and somebody's going to do something. And it's not to say again that we implement them, but for us, it's evident in things like a hackathon. We have that coming up in, I guess, about 2 or 3 weeks for our organization. AI was a big part of last year's. I'm sure it's going to be a big part of this year's hackathon. And a lot of what is demonstrated by the Bitsighters at our company eventually then gets formally built and goes into our product. And the governance aspect of it isn't just about the guardrails. Like I said, it's about creating those safe spaces for bold ideas. If you don't, experimentation is going to happen on its own. And that's, I think, where some of the real problems will occur. So it's definitely a healthy balance.
And I think too, with the experimentation, like you said, it's going to happen regardless. And the introduction of AI is going to take place because it's so beneficial for enabling our internal use cases and product use cases. How do you then set up the proper degree of oversight without being too bottlenecked and restricted in how you look to introduce AI capabilities across the organization, or even just providing the general oversight of its usage so it's not so hidden?
Yeah, I think you can't just funnel AI into an existing council committee. It is that different. And for us, Bitsight, I'm actually origin, I should know it. But we've had an AI council or committee for well over probably a year and a half, 2 years now. And that included stakeholders from security, compliance, legal, data science, our business units and teams, but it was brand new. We established a new charter, what decisions the council is going to make on improving use cases, dealing with vendor onboarding, and then also reviewing, incidents or investigations that come up through our use of AI. And I think you then have to integrate that subcommittee into the rest of your organization and the processes. You can't build it in isolation. And the focus has to be around setting the strategy for approving those patterns that I talked about before. And once those are approved, you can move on and deploy them broadly within the organization. For us, we kind of have a second tier to our committee, which is called, the AI Champions Group. And they're selected business units or leaders who have, shown an interest in adoption. We know there's areas that it's definitely going to impact, various Bitsight employees. And then we use them and that group to help drive within the different business units and educate. But I think one of the biggest things is just around transparency. All of this can't be done behind a curtain and, out comes a code development tool, or out comes a generative AI tool for the organization to use. It is an iterative feedback loop from the governance standpoint all the way down to the end users and employees that are actually using the technologies, because it's happening so fast, you're going to get it wrong, and you're going to have to iterate and go through the process again at some point.
Has that type of oversight influenced the approach on how we look at introducing AI technologies into the business?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, I think with existing vendors, we've had to, understand how they're implementing AI technologies. With new vendors, we've had to understand, especially if they're being brought in for AI use cases, this is where diligence is critical. And simplistically, you can start by adding AI questions into your vendor onboarding process to really kind of classify things and hit the common ones, out of the gate. How do you use AI in your products or services that our organization is going to be leveraging? Do you train on customer data? I think, but it's also important to think outside the box. And one of the things that I'll do is, understanding what the websites of these companies look like. How are they publicizing their use of AI? What's their stance? You can leverage fourth-party visibility tools like Bitsight to monitor vendor ecosystems. You also want to meet with the product teams, the organizations, whether they're existing vendors or new, and understand what do the next few quarters look like and what does the roadmap entail. I think all of this combined, and again, foundationally grounded in questionnaires, this should give you a good indication of what their AI strategy is like. And the takeaway that if AI governance, is not in place, you can really run into some significant challenges down the line if they're not taking it seriously out of the gate. And it's not about choosing between innovation and compliance. It's really about building the systems that let you do both confidently and ultimately securely.
That's great. And I want to shift topics a little bit here and venture into our next conversation, because we're starting to really talk about it takes a village. It takes a collaboration across the organization, really, to bring in any vendor, but particularly so with AI capabilities. It's so fast moving. The vendor product roadmaps are so different. The unique use cases for them across the organization emerge on a daily basis, right? It's not like a particular use case is set in stone and it's that way for years. So I think that as we look at moving past the getting started phase, really setting those foundations in place that we just talked about, next is really like, how do you scale that? How do you grow that across with really this collaborative mindset? We've talked almost all of the questions we just talked about. You've discussed multiple departments that are involved, and it's really important for, I think, folks to think about that while looking on bringing new technologies into the organization, again, specifically when it comes to AI. So as we pivot into this discussion, we're going to launch another poll, give the audience 30 seconds here to talk about the biggest challenge or concern when it comes to adopting AI within their own organization. And then we'll take some time again to revisit how we're looking at that collaboration across the space at Bitsight, and our perspective on addressing these concerns as well. All right, we are wrapping up the poll here. I think we have a good, clear front runner. I will say, so it's the front runner here we've got is the lack of proper tools to evaluate AI risk as one of the biggest challenges and concerns. And I will say selfishly, I'm excited to see that answer from a product perspective, because that's the challenge we at Bitsight product want to help our customers solve. So it's selfishly interesting to see that is definitely still an open and large challenge for our customers. I don't want to miss the second runner there, which was the misuse of AI technology as well. And I think, again, that's one of the challenges where this is such a new piece of technology. You can apply it to so many different things, and sometimes that can come at different unintended risks as well. Chris, I'd love your perspective too when we look at this across the organization. Where do you guys?
I figured you were smiling with that perfect lead in for, all right, we can take this definitely back to the teams. But I think, for me, it goes back to something you said earlier, that it is moving so quickly. So I think it is hard sometimes to quantify the risk and the impact to organizations. And, I know at our company, we are evaluating a number of different tools that can hit the mark for us. And I think because it is moving so quickly, it's hard to put those guardrails in place sometimes. And sometimes you have to widen the lane of the road to be able to get it adequately. But that's probably where I would land. But certainly I would look to see those guardrails come in, and as the technology vendors kind of catch up, and even they're not going to outpace AI, but at least, kind of running with or slightly behind is also a win.
And so now as we venture into that scale discussion and talking about, again, I'll use the words, it takes a village. With my growing family, 3 and 6 month old, I feel that hit home, right? And I think villages happen across our lives. And here at Bitsight, we recognize that, and we come from a very, very collaborative organization. And so when you look at involving other teams and making sure that we look at this holistically, I think one of the key players that a lot of folks look towards are legal and compliance. especially with something like AI, where there's a lot of data being manipulated, being moved, and there's a lot of new things happening. How do you see legal and compliance teams playing a role in the adoption, really being a co-author into these policies and part of the discussion at the beginning?
Yeah, I think, I'll echo the same. The culture here, I think, is different than any organization I've ever been with for the positive. And I think that allows for greater collaboration between stakeholders, but that's not always the case at every organization. And too often, legal compliance are really that rubber stamp at the end of the conversation. And sometimes the no, or you can't do this, and you have to start the loop back over again. I think for AI, it's not just being at the table. I think legal and compliance have to be architects from the start. I am not going to understand privacy and AI regulations to the extent that our legal and compliance teams are, but I can bring together the technical safeguards, the team can bring together the business request, and legal has to bring together some of the risks as we have those conversations, because it's overwhelming, as things change so quickly and new regulations are coming up to help put those guardrails in place at, country, state, federal, global levels. Bringing them in early and drafting those policies as the decisions are being made is huge. At Bitsight, they're a part of our AI Council, as I mentioned before. They helped set and draft the original acceptable use standards for AI, both internally as well as for our customers. It really means that the policies are enforceable legally, they're practical, and employees trust them. And I'll even share that, with recent feedback, we're even in the process of updating our AI acceptable use policy for employees right now, because with platforms like Copilot, Cursor, and others evolving in that code development area so quickly, we had to go back and update some of the language based on feedback from employees. And I think that was really helpful for us to understand, hey, where did we get it wrong? How can we, update and articulate, what we actually meant and what needs to be done? That's in the works now. The draft should be done probably in the next 30 days. And it goes to show it is a company-wide effort. We want feedback from everybody as part of this process. And going back to legal and compliance, if they're co-authors, they'll speed you up instead of slowing you down.
And so when we think about bringing in new technologies like that, we get a lot of questions also from our customers about AI. What are some of the top things that people are coming to us the more we develop AI into our core product offerings to be mindful of?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I oversee our GRC team, so it's definitely have an understanding, and we tag every question that's related to AI that's coming in, just so we understand what are customers asking, what are they looking for, ensuring that we provide the right answers at the right times. I think you have kind of the most common set of questions that you would see. What AI models are you using? Are they proprietary, open source, third party? Where are they being hosted? One that's got to be in everybody's list is are you using our data to train your model? How do you protect against it from leakage? What frameworks or standards guide kind of your AI program as a whole? And then, how do you ensure, depending on, again, the use or the implementation of AI for the vendor, how do you ensure explainability, accountability, especially when AI is making decisions based on inputs? But overall, I think the key takeaway, the questions aren't, exotic. They're the same ones you should be asking, across the board to, and that's what we're asking of our vendors. I think it really is the collaboration with procurement, TPRM teams. You need to spend the time asking the right questions to the right vendors based on the AI capabilities that you're using. Because just because somebody has an AI feature, the business may have no need for it. And we don't want to spend time or wasted cycles going down the path of looking at those if they're not relevant to us. It's the same thing when our customers ask us questions. We're very clear, where are those AI built into the product and how we're responding, and with what responses to those questions.
Are there any particular? I know you said they're not necessarily novel questions at the end of the day, or exotic ones to be thinking through. But are there any particular top 3 or 4 questions that we ask our vendors when we're evaluating them? Are there or maybe not questions, but themes that you care the most about when evaluating?
Yeah, I think like I talked about, training on our data is, depending on what inputs are going in from our organization. We like to understand what they're using behind the scenes, whether it's, OpenAI or whether it's Copilot. Helping us understand what their ecosystem is also gives us a better understanding of what their maturity is. As I talked about before, even looking at their public-facing websites, if they've got dedicated AI pages to answer some of these questions up front, great. That shows a different level of maturity. Or if they're giving incomplete responses, that's often a challenge. But I think, again, really goes down to, what are you using to kind of get back the answers and the questions based on AI being used in product? What's your roadmap look like? And then, outside of that, it gets into, again, data being used to train, their models. And if so, help us understand why you are doing that. If there is a benefit and there's not risk to us, it might be something that we accept, or it might be too much for us to take on and we move on to a different vendor.
I'd like to, we got an interesting question come into the Q&A that's kind of on this topic. When you're looking at that vendor evaluation, are there any red flags that like clearly stick out in the answers you get back, or for things that you would say, you claim to be compliant, but I don't feel very confident about the direction that vendor is giving you in terms of the answers? Something to be mindful of in this collaboration with the vendors?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we find something in the questionnaire responses that contradicts something that may already be on their website, if they have an FAQ and to our responses, those are contradictory, that's a big red flag for us, because it shows that, things aren't being updated. I think just general understanding about how seriously they take AI. You can take AI. You can sense it thematically when you're going through the responses. Is it a yes? Is it a no? Is it a thoughtful response? I think those are big. I think for me, again, if you don't have a valid reason why you're, using our data to then train, the models, that's another big one for me, that we want to understand, why are you doing that? Also, is there the ability to opt out? And it just shows, again, a level of thought before these features go live within product that gives a lens into the maturity of the organization and how seriously, again, that they're taking AI. But AI, I think being AI compliant is, unless you have, ISO 42001, where you have an attestation that you are, I don't know that anybody's ever compliant. It's like vulnerability management. You're never going to win, but you have to have a strong program to maintain your risk and balance that accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you think about building the right toolkit for this type of AI governance?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different pillars. I think for me, when you look at the categories of tooling, there's, governance and policy tools that, manage acceptable use. Like I said, policies, reporting. There's risk visibility. So you look at TPRM products, fourth party visibility, continuous monitoring. Threat intelligence comes into play, which we haven't talked about yet. So that's, really it's CTI for AI related emerging risks and getting a pulse on, what's being used, what's being exploited. I think for us, for example, when we look at governance tools in general through the lens of problems we're trying to solve, not necessarily what's trendy. We want to make sure we're spending our time and resources where it's adequately focused. As I mentioned before, point solutions will always be needed. We have had them in the past. We've put them through to the AI Council, and we've said this is a buy versus build, and it will solve a problem tomorrow. And then again, it is something that we'll continue to do. But again, we want to make sure we're evaluating using that lever where it's most appropriate.
Makes sense. All right, I'd like to shift over to our last topic of discussion here around harnessing the power of data. Again, we'll kick off with a poll to see how the audience is feeling about their current state and jump into the discussion. So this one is kind of looking forward. We're most interested in knowing, what excites you guys all the most about adopting AI in your organization? All right. The poll will be wrapping up shortly. So I think we can jump into it. And I'm going to wait to ask you this question, Chris, because I know we want to kind of get your final thoughts on what excites you the most. But what we're seeing from our customers is all about, driving that efficiency, productivity gains. Again, I love that because from a product perspective, that's what we want to help our customers do. And as we talk about this next phase, it's really helping our customers do this with the underpinning of the data that they can trust. We're also seeing that as a runner-up, folks are looking to really unlock that innovation and look for new opportunities. So again, I think that's really what we talked about with what makes AI so appealing and challenging at the same time, or the newness factor to all of it. So when we look at that, where do you see the biggest gaps between the frameworks and the real world challenges of this type of AI adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm a structure-based person, so I mean, frameworks give us that structure. I think, but the reality of it is, it's messy. The outside the four walls of our building, things are chaotic, things are changing. Frameworks are static, threats are dynamic, and I think again, you can look at the NIST AI RMF, you can look at ISO 42001. They're excellent foundations. They don't necessarily evolve at the pace of innovation that's happening right now. And especially too with vendors embedding AI in platforms and capabilities and tools overnight. Frameworks also assume visibility, which many orgs don't know where AI is being used within their companies by employees, by vendors, or even by fourth parties, and you can't govern what you can't see. So I think the takeaway really isn't that the gap is. The takeaway is really that frameworks aren't wrong. It's that they're incomplete. I think that's where you layer on some of the continuous visibility with CTI, vendor diligence, and that comes into play. They close that space between the static frameworks and, like I said before, a dynamic reality.
Okay, so we talked a lot about the governance. We talked a lot about how to secure all these things, and we've talked a lot about the challenges that this great technology brings. But my last question for you is, what are you most excited about? Because there's so much positive things from this as well that I think we just kind of want to hear, what is the exciting part from your perspective about what this technology can bring?
Yeah, I mean, simple, plain answer is I'm excited about everything, about it. Now, it could be personally, it could be professionally, or just the geek that I am naturally. But I'm also a CISO and responsible for the security of our organization. So I'm always naturally cautious and or paranoid, but I think from it, my teams have seen early wins, both big and small. We talked about today, we'll go back to governance, but it's not about blocking AI. I think it's about enabling it. And, it's saving times for our teams by automating some of the repetitive tasks for operations, risk assessments, reporting, freeing up the team for higher value work. And I think it's changing things like threat intelligence for us. Like with the capabilities, we get continuous visibility into emerging risks, because this is where the world outside of our building and our company is shifting, and the risk is going to go with it. Being able to see kind of what attackers are talking about in real time is huge. And again, that fills that gap that I talked about from a compliance checkbox to a real world attack. And it helps us move from point in time compliance to like a proactive defense. You may not always win, but then also you can leverage some of the other layered defenses that you have to be able to take advantage of that. And I think that's the real value. Like I said, I'm excited, I'm cautious, and I want to make sure we have the right controls and capabilities in place as we continue to adopt. And my teams are the primary consumers of the Bitsight platforms. So, we test my teams talk, hand in hand with the product teams. We test what's being released, what's coming next. We provide feedback along the way. This gives me confidence that, what we're building can kind of really meet the challenges that are, again, point in time now. And then the poll question earlier around AI risks and lacking the certain tools gives me confidence of what the challenges ahead can be met, effectively and efficiently. So yeah, I'll turn it back to you, man. I mean, this is probably, your wheelhouse to kind of jump in and kind of give an overview of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, you just hit the nail on the head with one of the collaborations we didn't get to hit on. I mean, when we look at ourselves as a product company in the cybersecurity space, we lean heavily on you and your team as input into a lot of those pieces. Again, call it eating your own dog food, call it, whatever it may be, but that's been great for us from products perspective. And so that's another place that excites me the most. What a lot of the challenges we talked about today, a lot of the challenges that our own teams face are the ones that we in product want to help practitioners solve for. And so as we kind of pivot out of this open discussion, I'd love to take an opportunity to help you understand where we're going in the Bitsight product from a third-party risk management perspective, specifically around a lot of these challenges we see in the AI space and helping the end users overcome some of those challenges. And we've got an exciting AI-driven roadmap as well, because just like for a lot of the other tools and technologies that we're looking at, we do see AI at the center of a lot of the operational efficiencies, a lot of the scale, and we're looking to continue to bring it in the product too. And so I think we can go ahead and bring the slides back up, and I will run through a little bit about our perspective of how we're thinking about it. And so one thing that is absolutely critical for Bitsight and is unique for us is the data that we have access to, the telemetry, the threat intelligence, the frameworks that we can pull from. And so for us, we really see that data as the foundation. That is the engine, and AI is the key that turns it on. And so we don't want to be building operations and workflows in the product just to make things come faster for the sake of making them come faster. We really want to be embedding the intelligence into those workflows so that at the end of the day, you have as much of the proof points, the evidence, the validation in those workflows that you can really move at speed with the confidence because of the data embedded into that workflow. So what does that look like in real life? If we go on to the next slide here, the most recent advancement that we brought into product is all around our framework intelligence. Our last webinar talked about it in depth, but it's really about taking that common language that we talked about, those frameworks, as you mentioned, Chris, that is part of a bigger puzzle. It's a common foundation, it's structured, it gives you a way to evaluate, but how do we then integrate speed and data to allow you to have these decisions with the confidence of that information? So what we've done is if we've incorporated that real-time continuous monitoring data into the framework, we've applied AI on top of that so that we can give you turnkey results into the view of how a particular vendor is performing against a set of controls. It brings all of that evaluation back to the common language. Where we want to go with that is to continue to integrate those results into our assessment workflows. So within our vendor risk management platform, where we have the entire workflow for our GRC teams to work with customers, raise questions, track issues, manage that to remediation, bringing all of this data intelligence into those workflows as proof points and validation points. And then lastly, continue to grow and build out a more comprehensive view of that contextualized risk. So bring in more correlation to the underlying Bitsight telemetry that we have in our continuous monitoring platform, bring in more of our cyber threat intelligence overlay to understand real-time discussion, and bring in more of the artifacts that you are collecting from your vendors and triangulating all three of those data points to make the most informed decisions, again, within the context of that framework and in your workflows. So we're really excited about how these pieces are progressing and where we want to go next. But that's not it. We have even more opportunity to introduce AI-driven workflows. And you'll see if we go to the next slide, our perspective on also introducing agentic workflows. How can we do more for you and give you that time back to focus on the risk that matters most? And so we recognize a lot of the laborious types of workflows that we see our customers doing during risk assessments specifically. Things like taking the time to gather the artifacts across various trust centers from your vendors. How do you share that securely? How do you get to that information? And so we're looking at building an entire workflow driven through an AI technology that helps to enable that for you. So ones that can go through and curate, extract the information, and then load it into the Bitsight VRM platform so that it can be pre-sorted and defined. So essentially giving you the ability to collaborate with any of your vendors at the channels that they want to be operating in, get that information into the platform for you to assess and analyze, as well as then kind of shifting into the assessment part. How do we help you identify areas of risk, areas that you should be collaborating with your vendors on? So we're calling this the findings agent. And that's an area in which we can suggest critical findings for review, and then also help you manage the follow-up of those issues that you're tracking in collaboration with your vendor. So reminders, validations, and ensuring that we can do a lot of that busy work of chasing the discussion forward. And then lastly, the foundation of bringing all of that framework intelligence information into the hands of your vendors to give them a leg up in discussion as well. So again, we talked a lot about collaboration. We can't really do this risk assessment without collaboration from the vendors and the engagement from them. And this is all around helping to provide them a starting point of a questionnaire autocomplete. And I think, again, I just want to call back to the data here, where when we look at successfully providing recommended places to start and providing that autofill for answers for your vendors, it's using both the artifacts that they provide, both the subjective data that they may have given in a previously answered questionnaire, with the data that we see in that real time. Chris mentioned about kind of augmenting the questionnaire process with real-time insights, and that's where the data into this workflow really becomes a propel forward, because it allows you to see either validating points against the answers. It gives your vendors proof points to say, I don't just say this, but look at my data. This is the reality of it as well. So it's in ways bringing that kind of point in time process of the questionnaire to life and making that more dynamic with the dynamic risk. And again, that's where the two worlds coming together really gives you a much more robust view of the risk assessment. So these are pieces that we've got coming up on the roadmap. We are very excited about. We hope, we don't just look to solve operational scale for the sake of speed, but really introducing a lot of this data and telemetry to give you stronger insight while making your jobs easier. So we're excited about what's coming. And I'll pause there. We can shift into our open Q&A. I think we've got a good amount of questions coming through, and we can start to take a look at that list. I don't know, Chris, if any of them jumped out at you, but I'm happy to scan through.
Yeah, I think we had one come around, and I'd be interested in your perspective, and I can share mine as well, around, how should we think about fourth-party AI risk, and what's realistic to monitor, and more or less what's realistic to act on as well. And I think for me, from my lens, as I think about fourth-party risk from our vendor standpoint, it starts with the contract and understanding what the nature of the relationship is, and how they're using third parties on their end to be able to provide the services to your company, and even if it goes into your product or your service that you're providing, again, to downstream customers. So I think that's the first piece. I think the second is then understanding, hey, how can you continue to monitor that and those relationships should they change? But again, I think it's all grounded in the contract, but you then also want to leverage continuous monitoring tools.
Yeah, and I think too, from our product's perspective, that's one of the main use cases we see our customers leveraging our fourth party visibility to. And so exactly for that, I think I'll use yours again. You said it great. Like, the risks are dynamic and things change. So even when you onboard the vendor and you have a static list of, at that time, these were their service providers, next week that can change. And so using a module like fourth party allows you to see at any given point the telemetry we have to help identify connected vendors to your third parties. So essentially building out that visibility of the supply chain so you can have proactive indication of where does the third party have connections to fourth parties? What does that concentration risk look like? As well as, even identifying AI specific fourth party uses and looking for specific AI fourth parties in that ecosystem as well. So there are ways that we can help from Bitsight's perspective and being a bit more proactive in that space on an ongoing basis as well.
I think really the questions that goes back to the frameworks. With AI evolving so quickly, how practical is it for a company to adopt ISO 42001, like I've mentioned, given that there's probably going to be frequent updates, unlike ISO 27001, which stayed stable for nearly a decade. I think with any framework, you see iterations. I think it's expected. And I think for what it does out of the gate, and both too with NIST AI RMF, it establishes that foundation for what is known at this point in time. Just like even PCI DSS, you have 1.0, 2.0. It's going to evolve as the threat landscape or as the requirements change, just as the technology like AI is going to evolve as well. So I don't necessarily think you should shy away from it if your organization needs to adhere to that bar or to that measure and wants to undertake the effort. Again, I don't think it's wasted effort in any sense of the words. I think it's an investment, but certainly, again, then you would continue to comply to future updates down the line.
Another question came in kind of back to the intersection of Bitsights and frameworks. How does Bitsight's AI differentiate from generic AI tools when applied to a framework? And we just talked a bit about the product capability around framework intelligence and its end goal, all about integrating that data into the summarization, into the visibility of how an organization is adhering to particular controls. And so we see the core differentiation is that data overlay, the data intersection. Chris, I'd love from your perspective of practitioner, when using that, how does that change the world of frameworks?
Yeah, I think for us, anytime you can enrich decision-making process or be data-driven with what you're expecting to look at or the risks you're expecting to evaluate, it becomes much more grounded. I think for us, it's ingrained in everything that we do, as opposed to making assumptions or trying to quantify risk where you may not have all the inputs. So I think for us, it's paramount to what we do. And anytime we can pull in a data point, data element to substantiate our decision-making process, it validates to us and to others what we're looking to do.
Agreed. Okay, I think we've gotten to the majority here of the questions. So I don't see anything coming back, but I'm going to hand it back over and we can wrap up and talk about next steps and how to remain engaged for what's to come next.
Well, that was a very interesting discussion. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Chris, for sharing all your insights today. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this part 2 of the F-Word webinar. We hope that you are leaving with new ideas, some practical key takeaways, and of course, the confidence to think differently about how AI can be deployed within a framework-driven approach. Also, as a reminder, the full recording of this webinar will be sent over to you in the next couple of days. On behalf of all of us here at Bitsight, thank you again for your time, your participation in the polls, in chat, and also for being part of today's conversation. We look forward to seeing you at our next session. Until then, take care, and all of you have a great rest of your day.